In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. The following contains discussions of emotional and mental well-being that may be sensitive for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. When you think of an Indian wedding, what comes to mind? You're probably thinking of colorful clothing, fun celebrations, countless parties, and family gatherings with laughter and dancing.
ਮੇਰੀ ਸੱਸ ਬੜੀ ਕੋਪੱਤੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਾਉਣ ਨਾ ਦੇਵੇ ਜੁੱਤੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਸੱਸ ਬੜੀ ਕੋਪੱਤੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਾਉਣ ਨਾ ਦੇਵੇ ਜੁੱਤੀ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਜੁੱਤੀ ਪਾਉਣੀ ਆ ਮੁੰਡਿਆ ਗਾਜੀ ਰਹਿ ਜਾ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਤੇਰੀ ਮਾਂ ਖੜਕਾਉਣੀ ਆ ਮੁੰਡਿਆ ਰਾਜੀ ਰਹਿ ਜਾ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਤੇਰੀ ਮਾਂ ਖੜਕਾਉਣੀ ਆ ਮੁੰਡਿਆ ਰਾਜੀ ਰਹਿ ਜਾ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਤੇਰੀ ਮਾਂ
I'm Pammy, and I've been working in the South Asian wedding industry for over 7 years. I grew up being fascinated by weddings, and more particularly by Indian brides. I would see a girl in a sparkly outfit and bright red bangles and immediately run to her side. This early fascination led me to my current profession, a bridal hair and makeup artist. I travel across Alberta and get to be a part of someone's special day. As the years went on, I realized that behind the colorful celebrations, outfits, and jewelry, there was something else. Expectations. Expectations of how the bride, the wife, the daughter-in-law, or the single woman should behave. I never thought about this when I was younger, distracted by the glamour as so many of us are when it comes to planning or attending a wedding. But what happens when we don't meet these traditional expectations? In this series, we're going to learn of struggles that are often masked in an effort to encourage open conversations around expectations and having the courage to carve the life you want. We're going to meet people who are willing to break some traditional molds. Let's meet the Outlaws. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Kimmy. Kimmy is a life and wellness coach who began her career through her own personal healing journey. First of all, thank you for doing this with me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Super appreciative. I've known you for a long time. I feel like I've known you since you were a kid.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so strange. I feel like we hung out together quite a bit when we were kids, and then we grew apart quite naturally, and then it was like saw each other in uni, but we both had our different friend circles, but our families know each other, which is how we kind of go way back, right?
So maybe we can hop into a little bit of your background, how you came about coaching, and what kind of led you to where you are now.
So yeah, I started Clarity by K, which is my Instagram account. I started in 2018, and that was to discuss the taboo topics within the South Asian diaspora, right? The toxic cultural norms, all of that stuff that we don't normally talk about. I started blogging about it. What was different in 2018 was that I was going through kind of my own healing. I was going through my own therapy, my own counseling at the time. So I think it was a little premature. But once I completed all of that, I started the podcast right when COVID began in March 2020. And that was when I really saw things kind of go in the right direction for the community. And then I wanted to add more value as well. So I went through my own coaching program. I got certified. So I'm a certified life and wellness coach now. And that was my way of giving back to the community because I saw a problem with what was going on. And because mental health is so stigmatized in the community, we have so many people who will not want to go towards therapy, but they'll be more open towards coaching. And I think they're more open towards coaching with me in particular because I've had the lived experience of going through the psychological abuse as being a survivor of that. So it's like, oh, she gets it. So let's talk to her because she's been through it. And so because of that, I'm seeing my clients come forward with, you know, the stories with the abuse that they endure at the hands of in-laws is a huge one right now. And then also like, because I have that experience, there's also that like trust factor as in like, okay, we have somebody now that can actually open that door for us potentially. And it's really nice because we've kind of cultivated a community online. So
honestly, before you started your podcast, I wasn't aware of anyone actually speaking about it. Yeah, you would see Instagram posts and, you know, little write-ups and stuff like that. But someone who actually had the guts to speak up about your own personal experience, like that takes so much courage. That's why people connect with you so well. So I want to start with explaining to people what kind of the issues are or what the expectations are for women after they get married. So I asked my audience to submit this like a while, I think a few months ago actually. I got so many submissions. Like some of the main ones that people submitted to me were you're expected to live with your in-laws, you're expected to cook and clean, you're expected to be a housewife, or if you have a job, you're still expected to have a career and then also come home and take care of your husband, have kids pretty much right away, like not be vocal with your opinions, be submissive basically.
Yeah, for sure. So with most of the clients that I have, most of them are women. But like you said, right, there's that general idea that they're going to basically take care of the entire house the moment they walk through that door. It doesn't matter whether you, and like you had mentioned, right, you're going to be the housekeeper now that you're married. You're going to take care of the husband. You're going to take care of the in-laws. You're going to take care of the children if you have them. And at the same time, if you do have a career, well, you got to maintain that too, because there's a certain level of reputation that needs to be upheld within the community of, oh, our daughter-in-law might be a doctor. That's great. But that doctor comes home and is slaving away in the kitchen, right? Like there's stuff like that that's going down as well. Or that person comes home, however educated she may be, and her opinions are not valid. Her feelings are not validated in the home. What she believes, like when it comes to being a part of the family, yes, the daughter-in-law is an extension of the South Asian family, but who she is as a person, what she believes in, what her values are, what her opinions are, don't matter. It doesn't matter. And it takes years for them to matter, which is why this is such a problem, because there's that unrealistic level of expectation that this person is married and a part of our family and she's ours now. But who she is and who like how she identifies with herself and what she brings to the table, none of that matters. It's just about how she can serve the family and be of service to the family.
And so this idea that she is kind of coming here to service us,
Mm-hmm.
this stems from back home
Mm-hmm.
in India. And when, our parents or their parents came here, immigrated here, they brought those ideas here. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to explain to people where those ideas stem from and why people are bringing them over here. Through talking to, lots of people in my family, my own mom, I was kind of asking her, where does this idea of you have to live with your in-laws come from? In our culture, my understanding is that back in the day, back home, like it was necessary on a financial stage to stay together because there was a home that was passed on from generations, and you couldn't, like, people didn't have regular jobs, like, like the 9 to 5 doesn't exist there. It's like farmland, and it has to get passed on from generations to generations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that finances and being in, like a multi-family home is very common back home in India. The other factor, like going back generations, would be like women didn't have the same rights that they have today, right? Like they weren't educated. Their primary purpose was to get married, take care of the house, and bear children. And most importantly, to bear boys, to have sons that could then take care of the same land that has been passed on for generations, right? Because God forbid they have a daughter, well, she's not going to be able to take care of it because she's just going to go get married and do the same cycle that's expected of her. So I feel like the fact that women from like generations ago, and it's a very archaic idea, but the fact that they did not have the same rights that they have today. Like most of us, for the most part, despite being in such a strong upheld patriarchy, we're still somewhat equivalent to men, especially in Western society, right? Like there are female CEOs, there are female prime ministers, there are female managers. Like we are boss ladies in a lot of ways, which is great. But this idea that we still have to come into the household after we get married and still do the exact same that was happening like years and years and years ago, that maybe our great great grandparents, our grandparents, even our moms had to kind of endure, that is still carrying on. Why? I think a lot of people are still stuck in that mindset because whereas people who are living in India right now have evolved, because things have changed right in front of their eyes there with the culture. Those same people that came here in 1970 or 1980 or 1990 are just taking whatever India was at that time and bringing it here. And there is no evolution. Um, there's no going forward towards any kind of growth, which is the irony in all of this, because a lot of those parents are coming here being like, we want to have a better life. We want to give our kids a better life. But here we are still holding on to what kept us kind of like a prisoner in our own mind back in that time, right? Like we're still holding on to those old beliefs.
So do you think it's like a fear of losing like our culture in a sense? Like, do you think?
I think that's a part of it, but I think the bigger issue is the fear of actually losing control.
Okay, what do you mean? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I feel like parents right now, and I can resonate with this because there's a certain level of control that a lot of South Asian children have grown up with, right? Your parents are controlling, they're super strict. You can't go out, you can't do this, you can't hang out with boys, especially when it comes to daughters, I want to say, right? There's a level of control that was put on us from a young age. There's a level of control that's put on men or boys or sons at a young age too, where they're conditioned at a young age to be like, okay, when you get old, you're going to get married, you're going to take care of the house, you're going to take care of us. There is this responsibility that is on their shoulders at a very young age, and it's instilled in them from a very young age. So I feel like it's the control, and I feel like that stems deeply from a lot of insecurities, especially coming from, if we look at how our parents actually came to this country and the challenges that they had to go through and the significant traumas that have manifested in our culture for generations. There is control is kind of that only way for them to be able to control what's going to happen going forward. It's a way of dealing with the anxieties and the tensions and the stresses and the fears that they may have of losing what they have right now that is so good according to them. And so if they can keep that control over their children, which is really like, again, I don't know where the mentality comes from of them wanting to do this, but it's almost as if there's this fear that if we let them go, if we let our children go, that they're not going to turn around and take care of us. They're not going to respect us. They're not going to have our backs. I still haven't been able to figure out how to solve that mentality, but I feel like it's so deeply rooted in trauma and in just the hardships that they've had to go through, that without and the fact that they have never ever sought any kind of mental health therapy, which they probably needed from a very young age, going through everything that they've been through.
I always want to give our parents the benefit of the doubt because they've been in a scarcity mindset since day one. Like most of our parents come from background where they didn't have a lot of like money, and that was always an issue. And so since they were children, they've always been in this scarcity mindset. And now you intensify that tenfold, 100-fold even, coming here. They're working so many jobs and they're having kids and they're trying to stay afloat, and they just never, I almost want to say I don't feel like they ever even had the chance to think about their mental health.
Yeah, and I agree. Like they don't have the chance because they were never given the resources and the tools and the education that we had the opportunity and the privilege to have been given. Which is part of my point, is when I see some of these archaic toxic norms of oppressing daughter-in-laws in particular when they get married into a household, when I see how mistreated they are, when I see how normal they have normalized, quote unquote, abuse and emotional abuse in the home, I see that as a sad reality, because we now are in a position to do better. We know better, so we should be able to do better. Our elders were never in that position. They were purely victims of a continuous cycle, and they were never given the chance to actually learn how to do better or to learn what the repercussions of this behavior is going to be. And much like what you said, they come and they're working and they're just trying to stay afloat. But with that trying to stay afloat and you're constantly in survival mode comes a whole bandwagon of all kinds of other problems. There's, addiction, there's alcoholism, there's all kinds of things. There's domestic violence in the home because they don't have an outlet. And again, like I said, like we're talking just about pressures that women face when they get married. But like I said, it's so multi-layered that it's like, where do you begin to dissect it? And how do you begin to solve it when we're dealing with people in the home who have gone through that kind of trauma that stretches back so many years, right?
When I talk to women about or when I bring up this topic and I get feedback on it, a lot of the time people say, well, my mom or my mother-in-law also dealt with this. Like our moms go through this as well, like this type of like oppression in that home. And then the question comes up like, why is it being carried on? Like, why are they putting those same pressures on like the next generation?
The way I see it, especially through a coaching lens, is people who have been mistreated or people who have not healed, because we see that term all over the place now, will bleed on to others. So essentially what that means is that just because they were mistreated, that pain runs so deep that it's easy for them to project that onto the other person. And that's what happens when we have people who are dealing with unresolved traumas, mental health issues, have gone through different forms of abuse, don't know what it is, don't have the education to, figure out how to deal with those emotions that just reside within them that have been there for so long and they've been oppressed for so long that they project it onto the next person. And that's the most unfortunate part of this. Yes, there are some mother-in-laws who have also been through it and are like, oh my God, I would never, ever treat my daughter-in-law this way. And that's great. And that takes a lot for them to get to that. That takes a lot of inner awareness to get to that. But the fact is that a lot of people within the South Asian diaspora, especially the elders, don't have the inner awareness or the emotional intelligence to be like, wait a second, this is a problem. And because I'm hurting, that doesn't necessarily mean I have the right to hurt others. And I've heard some mother-in-laws been like, through my clients have said that, oh, I went through this, so you have to go through this too. Again, it's a toxic norm. And this is why we're talking about it, right? Because it's like, okay, you went through it. It goes back so many generations. That doesn't make it okay. And who is going to come in here and break the cycle? Well, I really hope to God that it's people like you and I, like people who know better, who can recognize abuse for what it is and call it out for what it is and be like, hey, this isn't cool, right? This is abuse. This isn't just, oh, this is how all daughter-in-laws are treated. This is just not all part of the transition. That's not what this is. This is abuse, right? And the sad reality is when our mother-in-laws might have gone through it, no one told them that that's what it was. That's the sad reality, is that nobody told them that, hey, like this is actually abusive. And even if they did, I feel like a lot of mother-in-laws didn't have a choice but to put up with it. Where were they going to go? They didn't have an education. So whatever jobs they were, working, if they even were working at the time, weren't going to put a roof over their head. Some of them didn't have jobs. Where were their kids going to go if they had children? They had no choice but to be stuck in that toxic environment.
What are some of these expectations and how do they manifest in people's day-to-day lives, or particularly in South Asian women's day-to-day lives after they get married, or even during the wedding process? Because I feel like that's probably where it starts.
Oh gosh, during the wedding process, when it comes to the expectations, I would say during the wedding process, definitely there's this idea that because they are the guy's side, or the groom's side, I should say, that their opinions and how they want the wedding to unfold takes precedent over the bride's side. And that's just across the board, right? And right there, that's a problem. I mean, I don't think I need to dive into that any further, but that's how subordinate they feel women are in our culture, where it's like, oh, the guy's side wants to do this, a groom's side wants to do this, so we have to do it.
That's actually, now that you bring that up, an idea just popped into my head. Like whenever there's a wedding going on, there's this underlying expectation that the bride side of the family cannot be too excited.
Mm-hmm.
they have to be tame. And this, it's so hard to explain to someone who's not in our culture, like how this manifests. For example, at the reception, the groom side is there, the bride side is there. The bride side has to leave earlier than the groom side.
Yeah.
And they can't dance too much on the dance floor. Like that little, like you wouldn't even, a person wouldn't even think that that would be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But that's how deep it is. Like that's how it manifests in like the most peculiar ways that to obviously us to it makes total sense. Well, not sense. It's just like it's just the fact of life, you know?
Yeah, I saw that, during my own wedding. I saw that during my sister's weddings. I've seen that as well. And the sad thing is that we enable that. Like we grew up with that, but did we ever say anything? And we still are seeing that happening. I mean, you come from the wedding industry. I've gone through numerous weddings myself, and we just accept it. We just accept it. And in another way too, how does it start at the wedding? Let's talk a little bit about I think I did a post about this as well on Instagram, and it was the modern day dowry. So it's when the bride's family will get the suitcase of suits, shirts, jewelry, small jewels. They try to paint it as like, oh, this is nothing. This is a small gift, but it's literally like a huge suitcase filled with all kinds of expensive clothing and jewels for the groom side of the family. And we say that, oh, we're living in a day and age where there's no such thing as dowry anymore. But what is that? What is that when a bride rolls into the house with that suitcase behind her and hands it off to her mother-in-law? What else is that? And how are we carrying these traditions forward? I remember when it came time to my wedding, I had a huge issue with it, but I was 24 and I was definitely naive at the time. And I was like, okay, I can argue with my mom about this one time and say, I don't believe in this, but whatever she says goes, because who's paying for this wedding, right? Like,
Yeah, you definitely do see that a lot. And I've even come across brides, they've told me that the groom side has sent over lists to them of what they expect.
yeah, it's our version of like what paying them off for us being married into the family. Like it's very degrading. And I think the issue that I have with that again is that it's so normalized and it's painted as tradition and nobody's questioning it. Right. And then the people who do question it, like myself, we're kind of labeled as the delinquents in the family that are, like, why does she have a problem with everything? Well, why don't we just take a step back and start challenging some of these norms that are so harmful, that are continuing to oppress women in these very silent ways? It's insidious, actually. That's the right word, in the way we continue to oppress women and the way our generation continues to enable it without even saying anything.
What are some of the issues or the conflicts that you see come up a lot in your coaching after the wedding has taken place and once the daughter-in-law moves
Yeah.
in?
So I would say, like, I thought about this actually, and thinking about the audience and that not everyone's going to be South Asian. I said the best way for me to describe it is imagine entering into a home where your way of life, your values, how you carry yourself is under constant scrutiny because you are the newcomer into the family. You are actually labeled as the outsider. And on top of being scrutinized for who you are, or who you think you are, I should say, you also have to be of service to them. So now you are serving the people that are constantly berating you and putting you down in so many different ways and causing you to question yourself. A lot of the things that I've seen clients come up with is, I wanted to go out with my friends on the weekend. And my mother-in-law was like, well, why isn't your husband going with you? Why isn't my son going with you? If they choose to do anything that is outside of their relationship, like, girls' night out, that's looked down on. Having their own independent life separate from their partner is looked down on. And, of course, like the housekeeping duties, why isn't she helping out in the kitchen? Why isn't she doing this? The one that really struck a chord with me, though, is not even having your own space in the home. So the idea that when you come from work and if you're not in that living room, sitting down, spending time, quote unquote, which really isn't like people some families and some people listening might think spending time is us conversating and connecting with each other. That's not what spending time looks like in a South Asian family. Spending time looks like you're downstairs or whatever, wherever the kitchen and the living room area is, you're there, you're seated, you're present, even though the TV's on and no one's talking, you're still sitting there, and it's just like, why is she not down here with us right now? Why are you not spending your weekends with us right now? If you choose to do something with your own family, as in if the girl herself is like, okay, it's my mom's birthday or it's Christmas or whatever, and she decides to go do something with her own family, that's looked down on, that's judged as well. And it's just like you think about all those, what people might think are like normal ways to live your life, which is why I said the best way for me to describe it is imagine your way of life being under constant scrutiny. And what's interesting, actually, I was listening to Jay Shetty's podcast today with Dr. Shafali, and she mentioned that women, the way we are raised, we're always looking for three things, and that's approval, validation, and praise. So approval is like, do I have permission to be who I am? So let's take that into this new home that we've entered, right? Do I have permission to be who I am? No. Validation. Are you okay with how I am? No. And praise. Are you celebrating the person that I am right now? No. So you put that in, and that's just a recipe for a complete disaster when it comes to the dynamic between the daughter-in-law and like her mother-in-law, or both, like sister-in-laws, father-in-law, whoever is involved in that situation. And it's sad, but we attach our worthiness as women, because that's how we've been raised, to those three things. And when those three things aren't being met, that is a recipe for a disaster.
Someone from outside the culture could say, why can't you just live on your own? Like, why don't you just cut that whole issue out and just move out on your own? So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about that, or why people don't do that, or why couples don't do that.
I think for me, like what's come up in coaching in particular is two things. One is there's definitely a pressure on the son to stay with his parents. And that comes, that again is just like an old archaic, I guess, belief that the son has to eventually take care of his parents when they grow old, right? And so there's that. But I think for a lot of young couples, especially if there's people from the Lower Mainland or even from Calgary, actually, housing is expensive, right? So where are they going to stay? How are they going to save for a house? They can go rent their own place, but what's ultimately going to happen is that's going to set them back a couple of years when it comes to buying a home. So it really, it boils down to like the practicality of, if I live with my parents or with my in-laws for a couple of years, I can save for my own home. But what people don't understand is that 1 or 2 years that you're in that abusive household is enough to break your marriage.
The whole financial thing that you mentioned is a really good point, because I feel like that's the justification that most young couples have as to why they're going to stay with his parents. And then I guess, the parents end up, they hope that, they won't move out. They'll just end up staying here.
Yeah. And then what ends up actually happening, and this I've learned through coaching too, is that young couple, they stick by their plan of 1 or 2 years. And then when they break the news, that conversation that they need to have of, so it's been 2 years, we have enough money, we are going to move out, is the most anxiety ridden conversation that a lot of couples have to go through. Like, I'm talking, the sons are shaking in their boots just trying to have that conversation, right? And we laugh about it because we don't get it, because as women, we're moving out of our house.
Mm-hmm. We have tough conversations since day one with our parents.
Yeah. Yeah. We're fighting all the time for the tiniest of things, right? But for guys, that's a really difficult conversation to have. And I think it's because of this mentality that they are betraying. And I had this conversation with a couple of men, actually. They feel guilty because from a very, very young age, it's been instilled that they're going to be by their parents no matter what. And a lot of them, unfortunately, face a lot of emotional blackmail when the topic comes up about moving out. Like I have had men tell me that my mom threatened to self-harm if I moved out with my wife. I've had men say my dad threatened to stop taking his medications if I moved out. There have been situations too where women have come to me and said, my husband doesn't even make his own income. There's a family business. They all live in one household. And the father-in-law isn't even giving his son his own paycheck because controlling the finances is one way of keeping him in the home. And unfortunately, that marriage ended.
Obviously, you do coaching. What are some things that you recommend to people?
At the end of the day, especially when, let's just focus on the daughter-in-law for a second. It's her own inner work and her work that she does on herself, her confidence, her worthiness, her self-esteem that can potentially save the relationship. It's that same thing, right? Like Dr. Shefali, she was talking about her book that's coming out, Radical Awakening, and she was talking about those 3 demons that every single woman is looking for, which is the approval and the praise and the validation all the time from others, right? If we can take that and be like, I am enough for myself, I am worthy, I love myself, I am my own hype person. I'm not saying it's going to completely extinguish some of the abuse, because if you're in an abusive household, you just have to leave. I just want to put that out there, right? Like there is no solution. If someone's not going to take accountability for their abuse and they don't understand it, which most don't, there is no solution but for you to get yourself out. But if you are in a household where you feel like, okay, I think I can manage and my own insecurities are getting the best of me right now, then it's that work that daughter-in-law has to do on her own confidence to be able to overcome some of those struggles. And that has been so far the only thing that has somewhat worked. That and moving out. But at least they have been able to move out and still maintain a relationship.
Do you feel like there's any benefit of sitting down and having these conversations with the older generations?
This is the thing. I've had this conversation with, my siblings, my husband, and I feel like almost all of the toxic things that are happening within the South Asian culture boil down to the lack of mental health awareness. And that, until we fix that, until we are able to get our parents into therapy, we won't be able to fix this. Because trust me, again, like speaking from my own experience, I tried talking, my husband tried talking. I can count like 1,000,000 times over 5 years to try to get somewhere. And we couldn't get anywhere, which is why it was like, okay, we need to draw a line, a really strict boundary here. And we're not on talking terms anymore. And that's the sad reality, is that when you say, what's the solution? Sometimes the only solution is walking away. And that hurts so much. And I want people, because I feel like a lot of elders will look at that and be like, oh, kids these days don't care about their parents. They just leave. Like, they look at these things like abuse, as a small thing. It's not a big deal, right? They don't understand the impact of it. And until they understand mental health awareness, they're not going to understand the impact of the abuse that's happening, right? So we get it because either we've experienced it or we have the education, we understand it. But now we have the hard task of breaking the cycle, which takes so much guts to do because it's so hard to walk away from your own family.
Do you feel like there's any conversations that can be had, anything that you can do prior to getting married?
Like I said, I think with South Asian women in particular, one thing that comes up over and over and over again is the inability to set healthy boundaries, because either one, our elders don't know what boundaries are. Okay. It was never taught to them. They don't know how to recognize them. They don't know how to set their own. They don't know how to identify them. It's one of the reasons why they're so fearful of what people are going to think and say, because it's okay to approach somebody and be like, hey, I heard your daughter got a divorce. What happened? That's a boundary violation right there. Right. But like I said, they have never been taught those things. And that's the unfortunate part of this, is that now as children, we have to have those boundaries in place. And that can be very gut wrenching to have to do, because we're so tethered to other people's emotions and how they're going to react, that we're afraid to have healthy boundaries. But that is one of the ways to save the relationship, is to have healthy boundaries. The other thing that comes up very often is the low confidence and the low self-worth and the self-doubt that a lot of the women are facing. So when I say that women have to work on their confidence and own it and know who they are before they step into that marriage, that's key. And I'll be honest, when I was 24 and got married, I did not know who I was. I'm still learning, but I feel like I've made progress. But people need to really ask themselves, what are my values? What am I going to accept into my life? What am I not going to accept into my life? And they need to be able to own that. Doesn't matter who's on the other side, and be their own hero in a lot of these situations, because a lot of women are looking to their partners and saying, oh, my husband doesn't support me, and that's sad. Trust me, that really sucks. But at the same time, you need to have enough strength and courage within you to be like, I got this, and I can stand up for myself, even if I have a husband who's still kind of navigating those feelings of guilt and shame, because he's dealing with it too. It's not that he's just, and that's the thing, what like a lot of people forget is that the men are dealing with it too. They're just dealing with it in a completely different way.
So this starts from a young age then?
Oh, it starts from like when we're born.
And this is interesting because I started this and I was like, oh yeah, these issues only come up after we get married. I always think like, if you have a supportive partner, you can get through it. But you're not aware, you're all stuck in your own head so much of the time that you don't realize that the other person is dealing with it as well. These insecurities that we bring into like the marriage or the household stems from like us being kids.
We as women in particular have been raised in a way where everything we do is in service of others. Like all the reasons why we feel good about ourselves is because our mom and dad praised us on only those things, right? It was like, and if you don't feel good about yourself for whatever reason, where did that come from? That came from others as well. That didn't come from you. Somebody put that in your head. And that's the thing that really gets me, is that growing up, and this is not to bash on our parents. I really want to make that clear. I want to say they were victims themselves from the parenting that they received. And then those grandparents were victims themselves from the parenting that they received. Like it's a toxic cycle, and it's to no one's fault. Like that I want to make clear. But now that we know better, we can actually break that cycle. And that takes courage, like I said. But women in particular, it's from a very young age, we learn that people pleasing skill, which is, oh, if I do this, I'm going to get the reaction that I want. And if I do this, I'm going to get a reaction that I don't like. And so I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's how we silence our inner voice. So when it even comes to the mother-in-law who criticizes us, we know that, oh, if I say something to my mother-in-law, I'm probably going to get an even more wrath or trouble, or it's not going to look good. Where does that come from? Well, that came from something that happened when you were a kid, and you established meaning to that situation or that conflict, and you're now taking that forward into every aspect of your life, whether it's your work, whether it's your relationship with your in-laws, whether it's your relationship with your husband. Like there's so many ways that women have silenced their own voices, because that is what we have always been taught to do. And especially, like, that just goes across the board, but especially within the South Asian culture. But what I question as a coach is what is it about their opinion of you that is creating such a turmoil inside of you right now? Why is it that your confidence is so low that these people can have this opinion about you, but you might have 100 other people in your network that love you and support you, but these people don't, and that is enough to eat away at your soul? That's the work that I'm talking about. If we can conquer that, then it's like, okay, this is okay. I had to do this for my own mental health. Why am I still so fixated on how it's making them feel? Why am I still so fixated on how they are viewing me? I had to do this to save myself. That's a huge, huge, huge task for you. Like, think about that. Like, you need to save yourself and your marriage from these people. That's a big thing to say out loud.
So I feel so what I'm getting from this conversation and like experienced as a coach is that we need to talk more about mental health and how important it is, not only with like for us, but also like our parents. So how do we do this? Like, obviously talking about it like this is a great way to start, like having these conversations out in the open. But what are some other things?
I think the idea that you need to be like completely broken to seek therapy needs to just go out the window, right? Like, I think every single person can benefit from therapy or from coaching. You don't need to be in a bad place to seek coaching or therapy. And what I have noticed myself is by going through the therapy myself and by completing the coaching certification myself, I have brought that value to my own family, to my own marriage. Maybe that's a small way we can bring that to our parents, because like you had mentioned, right? Like, you want to give your elders the benefit of the doubt because of the struggles that they had to endure to get to this point, right? But at the same time, let's think about those struggles and the impact that's had on them. Those aren't going to go away. Those are there. And there's a reason why their behaviors are coming out in passive aggressive notions left, right, and center, right? Because there's those struggles that are still manifesting. You can't brush under the rug abuse, addiction, alcoholism, infidelity, like you name it. You know, our elders have seen it, death, murders, like all kinds of stuff, right? Um, you can't brush that stuff under the rug. But I'm hoping that if we can open our eyes a little bit to welcome in the fact that, okay, we come from these homes that have conditioned us to box us into how we need to show up in the world. And that in of itself is enough for me to be like, okay, I need to work on myself. If we can work on ourselves, then hopefully we can bring that to our parents. And hopefully we can have healthier conversations. We can understand and empathize with why they are behaving the way they are. And that's the key is, okay, yes, households can be abusive, they can be toxic, but we need to be able to empathize with their journey. That doesn't mean stay and deal with the toxicity, but that just means I'm coming from a place of compassion, I'm coming from a place of love, and I can't help you until you decide to help yourself. And that's why I'm stepping away. That is basically establishing a boundary, a healthy one. And more people need to understand that leaving relationships, or whether you decide to go for a divorce because that's your current situation, leaving that is not necessarily you kicking somebody in the butt and saying you guys are horrible people, you know? It's saying like, you guys have been through something, because it's only the people that are hurting the most that hurt others. We've heard that quote.
Hurt people, yeah.
Yeah, hurt people hurt people. And so let's lean into it with empathy, but also know how to draw the line for our own mental health and for our own well-being.
If you want to drop your socials, where to find you, and your coaching, feel free. The floor is yours.
Well, awesome. Well, if anybody wants to follow me, they can find me on Instagram. So it's at Clarity by K. That's with a K. Clarity by K Coaching. And yeah, you guys can send me a DM. My DMs are always open to just have a conversation. And yeah, hopefully this opens the doors for some serious conversations within the home as well.
And if you guys want to check out Kimmy's podcast, she has done tons of episodes on these type of topics and even beyond. Super, super, super great conversations.
Clarity by K, it's on Apple and it's on Spotify, so you guys can find me there. And Pammy follows me too, so if you follow Pammy, you'll be able to find me. It's all good.
And yeah, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and hopefully
it changes things.
Yeah, change is scary, and I feel like that's, like, you know, a lot of the reason why people hold on to the way things are, but it has to be done. It's just it's too much of an issue right now for us not to be talking about this.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.